We're going to go into the port area of the city of Caesarea. These walls these are the Crusader era walls, right? So you can see the size or just have a better understanding of the size difference between like Roman and Byzantine Caesarea, right? And 1,000 years later, Crusader Caesarea, where it's basically just a port, right? Now these walls were put up with funds and money from the King of France, Louis IX, right? Who was also known as Saint Louis, right? Even though he is a saint, he's not a very good military commander. He leads a series of failed crusades, right? One he does so well, he actually gets captured by the Egyptian Mamluks, right? And France literally needs to pay a king's ransom in order to get him out. And they do so, and he comes here to the Crusader states along the coast, right? And he helps fund some of the buildings. Now, Caesarea is going to be destroyed in the 13th century, around 1277, by the Mamluks. Mamluks are a slave soldier caste that take over the Sultanate of Egypt, right, and rule for themselves for hundreds of years. This Mamluks were used by the Arab regime since around the 9th, 8th century because they couldn't trust their own people. So what they do instead is they go to the Asiatic steppes, like in the area between the Caspian and the Black Sea, and they kidnap little boys, 12, 10. They would later do it from the Balkans as well. All right, but they kidnap non-Muslim boys, very important because a Muslim can't have another Muslim as a slave. Right, so they take non-Muslim boys, they teach them, right, the arts of warfare, the tenets of Islam, right, and they are going to be the backbone of all of these Muslim armies. Now, eventually, or you're going to have one general in 1250 says, "I can run things better than the Sultan," and he kills them, and he establishes the Mamluk dynasty, right, and they're going to rule here until the Turks take it over from them in the 1517. Anybody watch Game of Thrones by any chance? So the Unsullied are based off of the Mamluks. Okay, it's that kind of thing. They were very, very good soldiers, although they were horse archers. They were amazing horse archers, right? And they even stopped the Mongolians later on. Maybe I'll tell you that story if we have time, around the area of Beit Shan. So the areas that we see over to your right, like these huge vaulted, that's a huge platform that supported a very large building structure, right? And that is where Herod chose to build the temple to Augustus, right, and the goddess Roma. Right, and this is also the beginning, by the way, of like worshiping the emperors of gods, because that really wasn't how it was before. And this is the beginning of this process. You would, like, merchants and sailors, they'd come in from the dock in the harbor, they'd go up these steps that would lead up to the temple, right? And because you're either going on a dangerous journey or you're finishing a dangerous journey, you want to thank the gods, right, for protecting you, or ask them to protect you, right? So you'd walk up there, right, and offer your sacrifice. Now, later, when the Romans become Byzantines, i.e. Christian, they tear down this old temple and they build a very large octagonal Byzantine church. Now, this church is destroyed in the 7th century by the Persians when they conquer the land, right? And then a few years later, the Muslims come and they build a mosque on the site of where this old Byzantine church was, where this old Roman temple was. That gets destroyed, right, by the Crusaders. They build a Catholic church on the ruins of this old mosque, which is built on the ruins of an old Byzantine church, which is built on the ruins of an old, right, Roman temple. You noticing a pattern here? Right, holy sites stay holy. This is going to happen many times in Israel and in world history, right? Especially when it's a new religion, right? Because if your God was a real God, he wouldn't allow me to conquer you, destroy your house of worship, and build my house of worship right on yours, right? So who's right in this context? I am. So you should convert, right, to my religion. Right, now these archways are going to be part of Herod's business model, right, for Caesarea. And in fact, the entire area was covered by water. Right, this was like the inner port of the port of Caesarea, and Herod had his own little private port area over here on the left-hand side. All right, so this is the port. Now, to understand why Herod decided to build the city here and not there, right, or there, right, we have to understand ancient maritime travel, right? The ships, right, of 2,000 years ago, they can't cross. They could, but they don't really want to cross the open ocean because the size of the waves during the storms is just too much for these small boats, and they're going to sink. So they merchants, right, sailors, travel along the coast, sometimes even beaching the ship at night, right, on the coast, and then in the morning pushing it back out into the water, right? But they travel along the coast when it's stormy, right? They find the closest port to call if they can, wait out the storm, and then continue along their journey, right? So the closest port to our north is a place called Dora, which is about a 30-minute drive in this direction, and Jaffa, which is about an hour's drive in this one, right? So it's like roughly in the middle. Now, he has a problem, right? He doesn't want this to be, a slow-moving port where you have to dock 100, 200 yards off, right? Lower everything into smaller boats. He wants the big boats to come and dock right here in the harbor, right? But there's no natural deep water. So what does Herod do? He doesn't care about this. That's why we call him Herod the Great. He takes these huge barges, right? Like caissons, fills it with volcanic pumice and ash and limestone, and sink it into the water. And when it sinks into the water, it turns into Roman concrete. Now, the cool thing about Roman concrete is that the older it gets, the harder it becomes, because it's a crystallization process, right? And so it's basically crystallizing. To this day, it's still crystallizing, right? And so he takes out these caissons, right? Floats it out. They float out these carats and then sink it, right? Then they take out another one, and then they sink this one. Take out another one, sink this one, take out another one, until eventually the last one is popping up above the water, okay? And then you go on to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. You go hundreds of meters out, and now you have dry land above the water, right? And then you could build the buildings and structures needed, right, for the harbor. And now people can just sail in, right, from the northwest, right? They would have a lighthouse named after Augustus Caesar's daughter, Drusilla, right? Herod knows how to name things after the right people, and his sons do also, by the way, right? Come in here and dock. Now, Herod also has another problem, right? The Jews are not like seafaring people, right? They're not a commerce people. Nowadays they are, but 2,000 years ago, right? They were an agricultural-based people, right? And so he needs to find merchants that want to come and dock here, right? But again, he's on the far edge of his empire, right? They worry about this new harbor, so he needs to entice. And the way that he entices new merchants is he gives away the docking privileges for free. Now, how do you make money if you're giving away your docks for free? Easy, because the merchants come, right? They're in the middle of the world here, right? You're getting goods from Babylon, from Syria, from Egypt, right? From Asia Minor. They're coming this way, right? They are buying up all these products coming into your land. They are buying up your local products as well, okay? And they are storing it in the storage rooms, and there you pay money. You have to pay money for the storage, right? And now when it's the trading season, these guys, they get all these goods from all over the world, and they'll go, like they get Roman and Greek goods, right? And they go to Egypt and Rome, right? They go to Egypt, right? And they get there with Roman and Greek goods before the Roman and Greek merchants do. Now, the law of supply and demand says that if you have the supply and there's a high demand, you could jack up your prices, right? And so now, right, they're selling these goods at high rates. They're buying up Egyptian goods, sailing back, going to Greece and Rome, right, before the Egyptian or Greek and Roman people do, right, selling again at high prices because they're the only ones, or very few. So Herod has really cornered the market, right? And he makes Caesarea a huge economic boon, not just for his kingdom, but also for the Roman Empire as a whole. Right, it's a huge, huge port, and will continue to do so, right, even after the port has really been destroyed. Because not too long, maybe about 3rd century or so, the port gets seriously damaged by earthquakes, right, and the waves, because the currents are coming this way, and they're constantly, battering, right, the southern section, and the waters are going to eventually come over, right, and flood this whole area, flood the harbor area, right? But it's still being used, right? The Crusaders are still operating, right, and using Herod's port 1,000 years later. Any questions? So this is an amphitheum, right? It's a Roman fountain that would have been prevalent in many Roman and Greek cities throughout the empire. It's a place for drinking water. It's also a place for some, depending on the situation, maybe festivals or ceremonies and rites. But it's a fountain, Roman style fountain. Now, notice that we are walking up this little ramp, which means that we are going back into the future. We're going from 2,000 years, from down below 2,000 years later, to roughly 1,000 years ago. All right, so we just got in our DeLorean, traveled 88 miles an hour. We've gone back to the future, right, using our flex capacitor, and now we are on the road of the Crusader period. And this is the marketplace. Right, we can see in front of us a gatehouse. Now, most ancient cities and medieval cities continuing, right, as soon as you got through the gatehouse, one of the first things that you would see, right, was the marketplace, where people are selling their goods and their wares, right, giving you special prices because you were their friend, right? This is very important in the Middle East, to barter and haggle, and you would have had, and you can also see, by the way, secondary use. You can see marble that was found from the ancient Roman and Byzantine time period. The Crusaders dug, they found marble, and they just reuse it to the best of their abilities. So we see here the Crusader Gatehouse with typical medieval European style architecture. We see the ribbed vaulted ceilings, which you would see in cathedrals of Europe at the time of the 12th, 13th century. You have the gatehouse over there to our right, and you can see the sort of the gaps in between the stones where the portcullis, where the metal gate, right, coming down, sort of an extra barrier, an extra obstacle for an invading army to have to break through. You can see the gap of the sunlight where you could drop rocks, hot boiling oil, hot water, right, on soldiers trying to break into your gatehouse. Now, this gatehouse has it's strategically built, designed. Right now, if you say you have an army and they've broken through your walls, right, and they're coming through, you're fighting in the gatehouse, and then they get to this point, and they have to stop, and you have this 90-degree turn they have to make, right? So all the momentum that they've gotten up until now stops, and they have to turn right, and they got to face this way. Now, you face right because most people are right-handed. Right now, the advantage for this design is for the defenders, because if you're like an attacker, you're going like this. It's a little awkward fighting like this. A defender, right, like this, right, using your right hand, right, with a spear and a sword, right. It's much easier to defend in this direction with your right hand than it would be attacking. And so this is why good medieval gatehouses, you're going to have a 90-degree turn, and if the topography allows for it, turning to the right. That allows the defenders to have the advantage. Now let's continue walking through. Now we're here, right, we're crossing the bridge. Now it looks, right, we're crossing the moat. And you probably think that there's something missing in the moat, right? That would be water, right? But we've had moats around the cities in the land of Israel since we've had cities, since the Canaanite era and before, right? And never in any of these cities, right, was there any water flowing in the moats. Because we couldn't, for a very simple reason. Right? Water is precious, more precious than gold here. We only get rain 4 months a year, and you need to collect as much as possible, right, to store and to use during the 8 months. And so you're not going to use this water as a military object or a military obstacle. You're going to use that water instead, right, for drinking, cleaning, all these kinds of things. You're not going to waste, right? The ditch itself should be good enough, right? And if you have good soldiers on the gates, right, they could stop anybody trying to climb over. Unfortunately for the Crusaders, they didn't have good soldiers on the gates, and that's how they took over. That's how the Mamluks took over. Remember, they're horse archers. They took all the stirrups from their horses, tied them together, made a grappling hook, like threw it over the side of the wall, right, and stole their way into the city. And then the Mamluks, by the way, destroyed the city. I didn't talk about this, but they destroyed this city and every other Crusader city along the coast because they were tired of the Crusaders coming back. Right, they wanted the Crusaders to leave and never come back. They would come back and they would hide behind the walls of their cities, right? And the Crusaders were much more numerically disadvantaged as opposed to the Muslims, right? So in open battle, Muslim armies, much better chance of winning. Crusaders, not so much. Difficult, right, to take over these walls, right? So if you just destroy the walls, they're not going to come back. They're not going to come, and establish a beachhead for more Crusaders to eventually come. Right? You don't allow the walls, there's no beachhead, and you've solved your Crusader problem, which they did. Let's go this way. They will never come back. They eventually will kick the Crusaders out in 1292 when the city of Akko falls. So over the course of hundreds of years, there were 4 aqueducts that were built to bring water to Caesarea. And the source of the water for 3 of the 4 was Mount Carmel, which we'll see when we drive north from here. Mount Carmel is a limestone, just like most of the mountains in Israel. They're all limestone, and so it's a very porous rock. The rainwater seeps into the mountain, right? And we have an aquifer, a nice little reservoir. And so the Romans built underground tunnels, right? Like these water tunnels, bringing the water from the aqueducts, from the aquifer, right, to these Roman-made, arch-built aqueducts. Right now, we can actually see 3 of them right here. And interestingly enough, we can figure out which one is the first one. Let's go this way. You have 2 built side by side, and then the third one is built on top. They're basically 2,000 years old, somewhere between 2,000 to 1,500. Okay. But I'll be a little bit more specific in a minute. So we can see 3 aqueducts, right? We have, this is the one aqueduct right here. This is another aqueduct right here. And then the third one was built on top of this one, right? There's like so you had 2 planes of water, right, running in this direction. Now, seeing the architecture here, which one do you guys think was the first aqueduct? So the first aqueduct was this one. How do I know this? Because of that, those lips right there, right? That's like an aesthetic thing for the aqueduct. If this were built, if this were first, you wouldn't have needed to, you would have no purpose for building that because it would have been built right alongside this one. It just would have been flat, right? So this was built first. That's why you have this sort of lip coming out here. And then this was second. It was built adjacent to the existing one over here. And then they built the third one on top. So the water, when it comes into the city, it's already at a higher area. So maybe it can reach into water in the houses, maybe in the second story of some buildings and things like this, because Rome, they did have indoor plumbing to the Roman civilization.
It moves water from one place to another. It's astounding. It's amazing. Get on the bandwagon. Pipe the shit right out of your house. Plumbing.
The first one was built during the 1st century AD. The third one was built by the second one was built by Trajan, who was the emperor during the 2nd century, and whose son Hadrian would crush another revolt. There was a second revolt against the against the Romans in the 2nd century from 132 to 135. This is called the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Hadrian was the emperor. So his dad, Trajan, who was the emperor during the absolute high tide of Roman power. Right after Trajan, right, the empire no longer expands. Right, it either stays static or it starts to contract. Right, so this is around the 2nd century. The 3rd century, the third aqueduct was built at a later period, which I don't remember off the top of my head, so I apologize. Maybe around the 4th or 5th century.
Is that the same Hadrian that built the wall?
That's exactly. It's the same Hadrian, right, who built Hadrian's Wall, right, to keep the Scots out. Or the Celts, really. They weren't really Scots, but they were the Celts, right, the blue barbarian hordes. So the city was over there to the south, okay? Now, we can see the aqueduct is gone, right? It's all gone. Why is that? Because the ocean has eroded away, right, the land. And it's done that because of what Herod did. When Herod builds the port over this way, he needs to build breakwaters because the current is coming from the south, right? And so he needs to build breakwaters, right, to protect the port. And so the current is sort of pushed out, and then it makes its way back, and then it's eroding away at the land. And it's eroded the aqueduct that was here. So that's why you sort of had this little bay over here, because that's the current coming back into the shoreline, because it was pushed out because of what Herod had done, right, to protect his port. Now the fourth one, which is not here, it's actually more of a canal. It's not the typical Roman archway aqueduct. It's actually a canal dug into the ground, because what the Romans did was they flooded an area and basically created a lake, right, and dammed it up, and then they just opened up the dam and allowed the water to flow down a channel along the ground, right? And because it's like this direction is higher in elevation, right, the water can just move this way, right? Because you always want gravity to do your work for you when you're moving water, right? And it's just sort of, it's actually through like the grass over there. You have to kind of walk through the grass in order to find the remains of that channel. But overall, there were 4 aqueducts that brought, at the height, right, but when the 7th century comes around, when the Arabs take over Caesarea, right, you had 4 aqueducts bringing water to the city of Caesarea, which at a tide around maybe 40, 50,000 people inside the city. Right, so it was a relatively nice sized city. And yes?
Where was most of the limestone imported from?
No, limestone. First of all, most of this is actually not limestone. It's called car. It's a local stone, which is basically fossilized sand. But if it were limestone, you don't need to import it because 80% of Israel is limestone. Limestone and dolomite. Right? Marble is imported. That you needed to bring in from either like Greece or Turkey or Crete or things like this. But this is all local sand. This is all local stone. Yeah, right around here. Yeah. And when we go to when we go inside the Caesarea, you'll see like almost everything is built using this type of this fossilized sandstone called car. It's called. Any other questions?